I'm Jessica Rodriguez, and 2 weeks ago, I walked into the most exclusive charity gala in Scottsdale, wearing a dress that cost more than my parents' monthly mortgage. My brother Marcus took one look at me and rolled his eyes so hard I thought they might fall out of his head. "What are you even doing here, Jess?" he whispered harshly, glancing around nervously at the sea of designer gowns and tuxedos. "This isn't some tech meetup in a coffee shop." But when his mother-in-law Patricia Wellington stepped up to the podium 30 minutes later and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our keynote speaker, the founder and CEO of ConnectLocal, Jessica Rodriguez," the color drained from every face at my brother's table. Patricia's perfectly manicured hand flew to her throat as her eyes locked with mine across the ballroom, and in a voice barely above a whisper, she breathed, "That's her?" Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in South Phoenix, success wasn't measured by stock portfolios or country club memberships. Success was my dad, Carlos, coming home from his landscaping jobs with dirt still under his fingernails but a smile on his face because he'd landed another client. Success was my mom, Maria, finishing her house cleaning route early enough to help me with homework at our small kitchen table. The same table where she'd count out bills every month with the precision of a surgeon. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house on Baseline Road, where the sound of children playing soccer in the street mixed with the rhythm of lowriders cruising by on weekend evenings, their bass lines vibrating through our thin walls. My parents had arrived in Phoenix from Guadalajara when I was 2 years old, carrying nothing but determination and the belief that hard work could build a better life for their children. Dad started with a borrowed lawnmower and a beat-up pickup truck, slowly building his landscaping business one satisfied customer at a time. Mom took whatever cleaning job she could find, often working for wealthy families in Paradise Valley who treated her more like furniture than a human being. They never complained, never made excuses, and never let Marcus or me forget that education was our ticket to something better. Marcus, 3 years older than me, had always been the golden child. He was everything our parents dreamed of in an eldest son. Responsible, charming, academically gifted, and blessed with the kind of natural confidence that made teachers love him and classmates want to be around him. While I spent my afternoons tinkering with our ancient family computer, trying to figure out why it crashed every time I opened more than 2 programs, Marcus was student body president, captain of the debate team, and dating the prettiest girl in his graduating class. Our house was filled with Marcus's academic achievements. Certificates and trophies lined every available shelf space, and our refrigerator was a gallery of his perfect report cards and acceptance letters. When he graduated valedictorian and earned a full scholarship to Arizona State University, our entire extended family gathered in our small living room for a celebration that lasted until 3 in the morning. Tio Roberto broke out his guitar, Abuela made her famous tamales, and everyone took turns toasting the first Rodriguez to attend a 4-year university. I was 15 then, still trying to figure out where I fit in the shadow of my brother's overwhelming success. While Marcus excelled in traditional academics, I found myself drawn to the logic and creativity of technology. Our family computer, an ancient desktop that Dad had bought secondhand from a pawn shop, became my sanctuary. I spent countless hours learning to navigate its quirks, fixing problems that would have sent most people straight to a repair shop, and eventually teaching myself basic programming through library books and whatever tutorials I could find on our dial-up internet connection. The computer was supposed to be shared between Marcus and me, but he rarely used it for anything beyond typing school papers. He found my fascination with coding puzzling and slightly embarrassing. "Why are you wasting time on that computer junk?" he'd ask when he found me hunched over the keyboard at midnight, working through programming exercises. "You should be focusing on your grades so you can get into a real college like I did." Even then, there was a condescension in his voice that stung, though I couldn't quite articulate why. Marcus's college years transformed him in ways that none of us anticipated. He came home for holidays wearing clothes that cost more than Mom made in a week, speaking differently, carrying himself with a new kind of confidence that felt foreign in our small house. He talked about his business classes, his internships, and his new friends with names like Bradley and Stephanie, people whose families owned second homes and took European vacations. Gradually, his stories stopped including us. He stopped bringing friends home to meet the family, stopped talking about our parents' work with pride, and started making subtle comments about, quote, expanding his horizons and networking with the right people. During his junior year, Marcus met Amanda Wellington at a campus recruiting event. Amanda was everything our family wasn't: blonde, polished, from old Arizona money that traced back to copper mining fortunes in the early 1900s. Her great-grandfather had been a territorial judge, her grandfather had founded one of Phoenix's first law firms, and her father Robert had served on the Arizona Supreme Court before retiring to manage the family's real estate investments. The Wellingtons lived in Paradise Valley, in a sprawling estate with mountain views, a tennis court, and enough square footage to house 3 families like ours. When Marcus brought Amanda home for the first time during his senior year, the cultural divide was immediately apparent. She sat delicately on our worn couch, accepting Mom's offered iced tea with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, complimenting our home in the way wealthy people do when they're trying to be polite about something they find quaint. She asked careful questions about Dad's business and Mom's work, the kind of questions that felt more like research than genuine interest. I was 17 then, a senior in high school with my own complicated relationship with academic achievement. Unlike Marcus, I wasn't naturally gifted at traditional subjects. Math came easily enough, but I struggled with essay writing, found history boring, and barely scraped by in foreign language classes despite being bilingual. My grades were solid but not spectacular, certainly not scholarship material. What I lacked in academic brilliance, however, I made up for in technological intuition. By senior year, I had completely rebuilt our family computer, upgrading it piece by piece with parts bought from garage sales and online auctions. I had taught myself HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and had even built a simple website for Dad's landscaping business that actually brought in several new customers. When our school's ancient computer lab kept crashing, I volunteered to help the IT teacher troubleshoot problems, eventually becoming the unofficial tech support for half the faculty. College, however, felt like an impossible dream. Even with financial aid, the cost of a 4-year university would have been devastating for our family's budget. Marcus's scholarship had been a once-in-a-lifetime stroke of luck, and no one expected lightning to strike twice. While my classmates filled out applications for prestigious universities, I researched community college programs and part-time job opportunities. The conversation about my future came to a head during Marcus's graduation weekend. The whole family had driven up to Tempe to watch him receive his business degree, magna cum laude, and Amanda's parents had joined us for the celebration dinner afterward. Patricia Wellington, Amanda's mother, was exactly what you'd expect from old Phoenix money: silver-haired, impeccably dressed, and possessed of the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money or social status. During dinner at a restaurant far fancier than anywhere our family typically ate, Patricia asked about my post-graduation plans with the polite interest of someone making conversation. When I mentioned community college and my interest in computer programming, her smile became even more carefully controlled. "How practical," she said, in a tone that made practical sound like a consolation prize. Not everyone is meant for traditional higher education, and there's certainly nothing wrong with technical training. Marcus, perhaps trying to impress his girlfriend's family, added his own commentary. "Jess has always been more hands-on than academic," he explained, as if I weren't sitting right there. "She's great with fixing things and that computer stuff, but you know how it is. Some people are meant for business and leadership roles, and others are better suited for more support-type positions." The words hit me like a physical blow. My own brother, the person who had once taught me to ride a bike and had defended me against neighborhood bullies, was essentially writing off my potential in front of people who were already predisposed to look down on our family. I excused myself to the bathroom and spent 10 minutes staring at my reflection in the mirror, trying to process the realization that Marcus was ashamed of me, of our family, of everything that had shaped us. That night, lying in my childhood bed, surrounded by computer manuals and programming books, I made a decision that would define the next decade of my life. I wasn't going to prove myself to Marcus or to the Wellingtons or to anyone else who thought they could predict my future based on my zip code or my parents' education level. I was going to prove something to myself. Community college turned out to be exactly what I needed. Phoenix Community College's computer science program was small but intensive, taught by instructors who had worked in the industry and understood that talent didn't always come wrapped in traditional packages. I thrived in the hands-on environment, building projects that solved real problems, working with classmates who were there because they wanted to learn, not because it was expected of them. I lived at home to save money, working part-time for Dad's landscaping business, doing bookkeeping and basic marketing while taking a full course load. In the evenings, I continued my self-directed learning, devouring online tutorials, participating in coding forums, and building increasingly complex projects. By my second year, I was creating websites for local businesses, charging modest fees that helped offset my tuition costs. Marcus, meanwhile, had married Amanda in a lavish ceremony at the Phoenician resort that cost more than our parents had spent on their entire wedding and honeymoon combined. The wedding was a showcase of Wellington family connections, with a guest list that read like a Phoenix social register. Our family was seated in the back, dressed in our finest clothes that still looked modest compared to the sea of designer outfits around us. During the reception, I overheard Patricia Wellington talking to another guest about the bride and groom's future. "Marcus has such potential," she said, sipping champagne that probably cost more per bottle than I made in a week. "Amanda is helping him understand how to navigate the right social circles. It's amazing what proper guidance can do for someone with natural intelligence but limited background." The casual cruelty of the comment wasn't lost on me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus had been transformed from the pride of our family into a project for the Wellingtons, someone whose rough edges needed smoothing and whose working-class origins needed to be minimized. Watching my brother laugh with Amanda's friends, speaking in the carefully modulated tones he'd adopted since college, I realized that he had chosen his side in the cultural divide, and it wasn't ours. After the wedding, Marcus's visits home became increasingly rare and brief. He and Amanda moved into a beautiful house in Tempe, decorating it with furniture that came from stores I'd never heard of, and hosting dinner parties for couples whose names appeared in the society pages of the Arizona Republic. When he did visit our parents, he seemed uncomfortable, checking his phone constantly and making excuses to leave early. The worst part wasn't the distance, but the condescension. Marcus began offering unsolicited advice about everything from Dad's business practices to Mom's English pronunciation, suggestions delivered with the patient tone of someone who knew better. He criticized our neighborhood as not the safest area anymore and suggested our parents should think about downsizing somewhere more appropriate for their stage of life. When I mentioned my programming projects or talked about my classes, he'd nod politely and change the subject, as if my interests were a phase I'd eventually outgrow. The breaking point came during my final semester at community college. I had been working on an ambitious project, a mobile app that would connect local service providers with customers who needed everything from plumbing repairs to pet sitting. The idea had grown out of watching Dad struggle to market his landscaping business, and Mom try to find consistent cleaning clients. There had to be a better way for skilled workers to find customers, and for customers to find reliable, trustworthy service providers. I called the app ConnectLocal, and by the time I graduated with my associate degree, I had built a working prototype and tested it with a small group of local businesses and customers. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Service providers loved the streamlined booking system and customer verification features, while customers appreciated being able to find vetted professionals quickly and easily. Marcus's reaction when I excitedly showed him the app was crushing in its dismissiveness. "That's nice, Jess," he said, barely glancing at my phone screen. "But you realize there are already tons of apps like this, right? Angie's List, TaskRabbit. All the big companies have this market sewn up. You're not seriously thinking about trying to compete with them, are you?" His words echoed in my head for days afterward. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was being naive to think that a community college graduate from South Phoenix could build something that would compete with established companies backed by millions in venture capital. Maybe I should focus on finding a stable job at an existing tech company, working my way up slowly and safely. But every time I used my own app to help Dad book landscaping jobs or connected one of Mom's friends with a reliable house cleaning client, I saw something that the big companies were missing. They were focused on scale and efficiency, but they weren't building trust within communities. They weren't designed by people who understood what it was like to run a small business or to work paycheck to paycheck. They treated service providers like interchangeable commodities rather than skilled professionals with their own expertise and dignity. So instead of looking for a traditional job after graduation, I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to turn ConnectLocal into a real business, and I was going to do it from our family's garage, just like the tech entrepreneurs I'd read about who had built empires from humble beginnings. The garage had been Dad's workshop for years, filled with landscaping equipment, bags of fertilizer, and tools he'd accumulated over 2 decades of building his business. We cleared out half the space, setting up a desk made from sawhorses and plywood, running extension cords for power, and using our home Wi-Fi connection that barely reached the garage on good days. Mom was my first investor, though she probably didn't think of it that way. She insisted on paying me a small salary to help with her house cleaning, scheduling, and customer management, work that could have been done for free, but that she insisted deserved compensation. Dad contributed by letting me use ConnectLocal to manage his landscaping bookings, providing real-world testing and feedback that proved invaluable. The first year was brutal. I worked 16-hour days, coding new features, reaching out to potential customers, handling customer service issues, and learning about business licensing, insurance requirements, and tax obligations. There were nights when I fell asleep at my makeshift desk, waking up with keyboard marks on my cheek and the Arizona sun already heating up the garage. Marcus and Amanda visited exactly twice during that first year. Both times, Marcus made pointed comments about my hobby and suggested I should think about getting serious about a career. When I tried to explain the growth metrics and positive user feedback I was seeing, he'd interrupt with observations about the competition or the challenges of scaling a business. His tone was always patient, as if he were explaining reality to someone too naive to understand it. The irony was that ConnectLocal was actually working, slowly but steadily. The user base was growing. Service providers were telling their friends about the platform, customers were leaving positive reviews, and I was beginning to generate enough revenue to cover my modest expenses. More importantly, I was solving real problems for real people, creating economic opportunities in communities that the big tech companies largely ignored. But success in the garage didn't translate to respect from my brother's new social circle. At family gatherings where Amanda's presence was increasingly common, I could feel the polite disinterest whenever I mentioned my work. Patricia Wellington would ask perfunctory questions about my computer project with the same tone she might use to inquire about a craft hobby. The contrast with how they discussed Marcus's career was stark. He had landed a position with a large insurance company, working his way up to a management role that came with a respectable salary and benefits package. Amanda had found work in marketing for a luxury resort chain, a job that provided excellent networking opportunities with Phoenix's tourism and hospitality industry leaders. Their success was real and deserved respect, but it was also safe and conventional in a way that fit perfectly with Wellington family expectations. Marcus wore suits to work, attended professional networking events, and could explain his job to anyone in terms they immediately understood. I wore jeans and worked from a garage, building something that most people in their social circle didn't quite comprehend or value. As ConnectLocal continued to grow, I began to understand that I was building more than just a business. I was creating a bridge between the world I came from and the world I was determined to succeed in, but on my own terms, rather than by abandoning my roots the way Marcus had done. By my second year of running ConnectLocal from the garage, I had learned that success in the tech world wasn't just about building great software. It was about understanding markets, managing cash flow, and most importantly, proving that your vision could scale beyond a small group of loyal users. The app had grown to serve over 300 local service providers across Phoenix, generating enough revenue for me to pay myself a modest salary and even hire my first part-time employee, Taylor Kim, a recent ASU computer science graduate who shared my passion for community-focused technology. Taylor brought fresh perspectives and coding skills that complemented my own, But more than that, she brought validation that what I was building mattered. She had received multiple job offers from established tech companies in Silicon Valley, offering salaries that dwarfed what I could pay, yet she chose to join ConnectLocal because she believed in the mission. Working alongside Taylor in the garage that had become our unofficial headquarters, I began to see my company through the eyes of someone who understood both the technical challenges and the potential impact of what we were creating. The breakthrough moment came when Maria Santos, a single mother who ran a catering business from her home kitchen, sent me a message through the app that changed how I understood the value of ConnectLocal. Maria had been struggling to find consistent clients for her authentic Mexican food catering, competing against established restaurants with bigger marketing budgets and more resources. Through ConnectLocal, she had connected with customers who specifically wanted authentic, home-style Mexican cuisine for their events. In 6 months, her bookings had tripled, allowing her to hire her teenage daughter as help and even consider renting commercial kitchen space. "Jessica," her message read, "before your app, I was just another person with a business card that nobody saw. Now I have customers who specifically seek me out because they trust your platform and they can see the reviews from my community. You didn't just give me software, you gave me hope that I could build something real for my family." Reading that message at 2 a.m. in the garage, surrounded by empty coffee cups and pages of handwritten code notes, I realized that ConnectLocal wasn't just connecting service providers with customers. It was creating economic opportunities in communities where people understood the value of personal relationships and quality service over corporate efficiency. We weren't trying to replace the big platforms, we were serving the people those platforms ignored or undervalued. The financial reality of running a growing company, however, was becoming increasingly complex. Server costs were rising as our user base expanded, and we needed more sophisticated features to compete effectively. I had bootstrapped the company using my savings, family contributions, and the modest revenue we generated, but sustainable growth would require real investment. That meant learning about business plans, financial projections, and investor presentations, areas where my community college education hadn't prepared me. I spent months teaching myself business fundamentals through online courses, library books, and free webinars designed for entrepreneurs. The learning curve was steep, but I approached it with the same methodical persistence that had helped me master programming. Every evening, after a full day of coding and customer support, I would study cash flow management, marketing strategies, and growth metrics until my eyes burned from staring at screens. Marcus remained skeptical of my progress, though his criticism had evolved from outright dismissal to what he probably considered helpful guidance. During one particularly awkward family dinner, he offered to take a look at the business side of things, to help me understand whether ConnectLocal had real potential or if I should start considering more traditional career paths. "I'm not trying to crush your dreams, Jess," he said, cutting into Mom's homemade enchiladas with the precision of someone who had learned proper dining etiquette. "But there's a difference between a side hustle and a viable business. Amanda knows some people in marketing who could give you honest feedback about your positioning and growth strategy." The offer was presented as generosity, but it felt like condescension wrapped in family concern. Marcus had never asked detailed questions about our user metrics, revenue growth, or customer retention rates. He had never expressed genuine curiosity about the technical challenges we were solving or the market gaps we were filling. His assessment of ConnectLocal's potential was based entirely on his assumption that anything built in our parents' garage by his community college-educated sister couldn't possibly compete with real businesses. I declined his offer politely, explaining that Taylor and I were developing our own growth strategy based on direct customer feedback and market research. Marcus nodded with the patient expression of someone who had expected this response, as if my independence was another sign of naivete that I would eventually outgrow. What Marcus didn't understand was that ConnectLocal's unconventional origins were actually its greatest strength. Because Taylor and I had built the platform while living in the community it served, we understood user needs in ways that distant corporate teams never could. We knew that many of our service providers preferred text message notifications over email because they were often working with their hands during the day. We understood that customers in certain neighborhoods valued bilingual customer support not as a nice-to-have feature, but as essential accessibility. Our competitive advantage wasn't just technology. It was empathy and cultural competence that came from genuine connection to our user base. When we added features like flexible payment options for customers who preferred cash transactions, or scheduling tools that accommodated the irregular hours of gig workers, we weren't responding to market research data. We were solving problems we had personally experienced and witnessed in our own families and community. The technical evolution of ConnectLocal during this period reflected my own growth as both a programmer and a business owner. What had started as a relatively simple booking platform had evolved into a comprehensive ecosystem that included customer verification systems, integrated payment processing, scheduling tools, and even basic inventory management for service providers who needed to track supplies and equipment. Each new feature represented weeks of planning, coding, testing, and refinement. Taylor and I would identify problems through user feedback, research potential solutions, build prototypes, and then test them with a small group of customers before rolling them out to the entire platform. The process was methodical but also deeply personal, because we knew that every improvement we made had real impact on people's livelihoods. The garage had been transformed into a surprisingly functional workspace, with whiteboards covering every wall, multiple monitors displaying real-time user analytics, and a coffee station that would have impressed most traditional offices. Dad had installed better lighting and ventilation, joking that if his daughter was going to build the next big tech company, she deserved better than working in a cave. Mom had become our unofficial office manager and customer service supervisor, though she would have laughed at those titles. She answered calls from Spanish-speaking customers who felt more comfortable discussing their needs in their native language, helped troubleshoot scheduling conflicts with the patience of someone who understood that small business owners often juggled multiple responsibilities, and provided the kind of personal touch that automated customer service systems couldn't replicate. Watching Mom interact with ConnectLocal users, I realized that our family's working-class background wasn't something to overcome or hide from potential investors. It was integral to our understanding of the market we served. Mom knew what it felt like to depend on word-of-mouth referrals for business growth. Dad understood the challenges of managing irregular income and the importance of building long-term customer relationships. Their insights shaped product decisions in ways that traditional business education never could have provided. The contrast between our garage-based operation and Marcus's corporate office environment became even more apparent when Amanda started working in marketing for Desert Luxury Resorts, a high-end hospitality company that catered to wealthy tourists and business travelers. Her work involved promoting five-star accommodations, exclusive spa services, and premium dining experiences to customers who thought nothing of spending more on a weekend getaway than most families earned in a month. During the rare occasions when Marcus and Amanda visited our house, Amanda would politely ask about ConnectLocal with the kind of detached interest someone might show toward a charity project. She would nod thoughtfully while I explained our latest features or growth metrics, but her questions revealed a fundamental disconnect from the problems we were solving. "Have you considered targeting higher-end service providers?" she asked during one visit, scrolling through the app on her phone. "I mean, some of these prices seem quite low. Wouldn't you make more money by focusing on premium services instead of these more basic offerings?" The question revealed so much about the different worlds we inhabited. Amanda saw low prices as a problem to be solved through market repositioning, while I understood that affordable services were often the point. Many of our customers specifically chose ConnectLocal because they could find quality service providers whose rates fit their budgets. Our platform succeeded because it served people who were often overlooked by premium-focused businesses, not despite that fact. I tried to explain our market positioning and the deliberate choice to serve working-class communities, but I could see Amanda's polite confusion. In her professional experience, success meant moving upmarket, attracting wealthier customers, and maximizing profit margins. The idea that a business might intentionally serve lower-income customers as a core strategy rather than a temporary necessity didn't align with her understanding of how companies should grow. Marcus reinforced Amanda's perspective with observations about the challenges of scaling a business that served price-sensitive customers. "You're working really hard for relatively small margins," he pointed out, though he had never asked about our actual financial performance. "At some point, you'll need to decide whether you want to build a lifestyle business or something with real growth potential." The implication was clear. Real businesses served affluent customers, generated high margins, and fit easily into traditional investment and growth models. What we were building in the garage might be personally fulfilling, but it wasn't serious in the way that Marcus's corporate career or Amanda's luxury hospitality marketing were serious. What they didn't realize was that ConnectLocal was achieving the kind of sustainable growth that many traditional businesses envied. Our customer retention rates were remarkably high because we solved real problems for people who had limited alternatives. Service providers stayed on our platform because we treated them as partners rather than commodities. And customers returned because they trusted our verification and quality assurance processes. More importantly, we were building something that created genuine value in communities where economic opportunities were often limited. When Jose, a skilled carpenter who had been laid off from a construction company, was able to build a thriving independent business through ConnectLocal bookings, that success rippled through his family and neighborhood in ways that went far beyond our revenue metrics. When Petra, an experienced house cleaner who had been working for an agency that took 40% of her earnings, was able to connect directly with customers who paid her fairly and treated her with respect, that transformation represented the kind of impact that motivated me to work 18-hour days without complaint. These success stories accumulated over months and years, creating a foundation of trust and community engagement that would have been impossible to replicate through traditional marketing strategies. Our users became advocates not just because they were satisfied customers, but because they understood that ConnectLocal was genuinely committed to their success. The technical challenges of scaling our platform while maintaining this community focus required constant innovation and problem solving. As our user base grew, we needed more sophisticated algorithms for matching service providers with appropriate customers, better fraud prevention systems, and more robust infrastructure to handle peak usage periods. Taylor and I became experts in areas we had never expected to master. From cybersecurity protocols, to payment processing regulations, to mobile app optimization. Every challenge pushed us to learn faster and think more creatively than we had imagined possible when we started in the garage with nothing but enthusiasm and a basic prototype. The learning process was exhilarating but also exhausting. There were weeks when we worked around the clock to fix critical bugs or implement urgent feature requests, surviving on coffee, takeout food, and the adrenaline of knowing that hundreds of people depended on our platform for their livelihoods. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the satisfaction of building something that mattered. By the end of our second year, ConnectLocal had processed over 50,000 bookings, generated substantial revenue for hundreds of service providers, and earned recognition from local business organizations as an innovative solution to workforce development challenges. We had grown from 2 people in a garage to a team of 8 employees, working from a small but professional office space in downtown Phoenix. The transition from garage startup to legitimate business required learning new skills and taking on new responsibilities that sometimes felt overwhelming. Managing employees, navigating legal requirements, handling investor meetings, and maintaining work-life balance became ongoing challenges that required the same methodical problem-solving approach I had applied to technical obstacles. Taylor had evolved from part-time helper to chief technology officer, bringing in additional engineering talent and establishing development processes that allowed us to build features more efficiently without sacrificing quality. Her leadership freed me to focus on business development, customer relationships, and strategic planning, areas where my community connections and market intuition provided competitive advantages. The success felt surreal at times, particularly when contrasted with Marcus's continued skepticism and Amanda's polite disinterest. Family gatherings became exercises in diplomatic conversation, where I would downplay our achievements to avoid seeming boastful, while they would offer generic encouragement that felt more like social obligation than genuine support. I began to understand that their lack of enthusiasm wasn't necessarily personal, though it certainly felt that way. Marcus and Amanda inhabited a world where success looked different, where credibility came from established institutions and recognized credentials, where innovation meant improving existing systems rather than creating entirely new approaches to old problems. ConnectLocal represented something they couldn't quite categorize or evaluate using their familiar frameworks. We weren't a traditional tech startup seeking venture capital and rapid expansion, but we weren't a small lifestyle business either. We were building something sustainable and community-focused, that generated real economic impact while remaining true to our values and origins. The tension came to a head during a family celebration for Dad's 60th birthday, when Marcus made what he probably thought was a supportive comment about my little business and suggested that I should think about what's next, now that I had proven the concept. The implication was that ConnectLocal had been a successful experiment, but that real career advancement would require moving on to something more conventional and scalable. I realized in that moment that Marcus would never see ConnectLocal as a legitimate business achievement, because it didn't fit his definition of professional success. No matter how much revenue we generated, how many jobs we created, or how much impact we had on our community, it would always be diminished by its unconventional origins and mission-driven focus. That realization was both painful and liberating. I stopped trying to earn validation from people who were fundamentally unable to understand or appreciate what we were building. Instead, I focused on the customers, employees, and community members who recognized ConnectLocal's value and supported our continued growth. The decision to stop seeking approval from Marcus and his social circle coincided with ConnectLocal reaching a new level of recognition and success that would soon make their opinions irrelevant. We were about to discover that the business world beyond our immediate family and social circles had been paying attention to what we were building, and their assessment would prove very different from the dismissive attitudes we had grown accustomed to at home. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered to our downtown office in an envelope so thick and elegant that our receptionist Sophia initially assumed it was a legal document. Inside, embossed on cream-colored cardstock that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a week, was an invitation to speak at the Southwest Technology Innovation Summit, Arizona's most prestigious annual conference for tech entrepreneurs and industry leaders. The summit was exactly the kind of event that Marcus and Amanda's social circle treated as the ultimate validation of professional success. Previous keynote speakers had included CEOs of major corporations, venture capitalists who managed billion-dollar funds, and entrepreneurs whose companies had achieved national recognition. The fact that ConnectLocal had been selected to present alongside these industry giants represented a level of recognition that I had never dared to imagine when we were working out of my parents' garage just 3 years earlier. Taylor practically vibrated with excitement when I showed her the invitation, immediately launching into plans for the presentation and discussing how we could use this platform to share our mission with a broader audience. The speaking slot came with a substantial honorarium, but more importantly, it offered an opportunity to demonstrate that community-focused technology companies could achieve meaningful impact while remaining true to their values and origins. The irony wasn't lost on me that this recognition was coming from the exact same business community that Marcus and Amanda moved through. Yet they remained completely unaware of ConnectLocal's growing reputation and influence. Their dismissive attitude toward my work had become so entrenched that they no longer bothered to ask detailed questions about our progress or achievements. In their minds, I was still the sister who played with computers in the garage, regardless of any evidence to the contrary. Preparing for the summit presentation required weeks of intensive work, distilling 3 years of growth, challenges, and lessons learned into a compelling narrative that could inspire other entrepreneurs while accurately representing our approach and philosophy. I spent countless hours crafting slides, rehearsing delivery, and anticipating questions from an audience that would include some of the most sophisticated business minds in the Southwest. The experience forced me to articulate what made ConnectLocal different from other platforms in ways that went beyond our specific features or user interface design. We weren't just another app competing for market share. We were proving that technology companies could succeed by prioritizing community impact over rapid scaling, sustainable growth over venture capital metrics, and authentic relationships over algorithmic efficiency. Our success metrics told a story that conventional business wisdom suggested shouldn't be possible. We had achieved profitability without taking venture capital funding, maintained customer retention rates that exceeded industry standards, and created measurable economic impact in underserved communities. More importantly, we had built a company culture that reflected our values, treating employees as partners and customers as community members rather than data points. The week before the summit, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. Instead of attending the conference alone or bringing Taylor as my technical co-founder, I invited my parents to accompany me as my guests. Dad would need to take time off from his landscaping business, and Mom would have to reschedule her cleaning appointments. But I wanted them to see their daughter recognized for building something meaningful and successful. The invitation to my parents wasn't just sentimental. It was strategic and symbolic. ConnectLocal existed because I understood the challenges faced by people like my parents, who built small businesses through determination and hard work, but often lacked access to the networks and resources that privileged entrepreneurs took for granted. Having them present when I spoke about community-focused innovation would reinforce the authenticity of our mission. Marcus's reaction to the summit invitation when I mentioned it during a brief phone conversation was typically dismissive. "That's great, Jess," he said with the tone of someone congratulating a child on a school participation award. "Those local business conferences can be good networking opportunities. Maybe you'll meet some people who can give you advice about taking ConnectLocal to the next level." His assumption that this was a local business conference rather than a major industry event revealed how little attention he paid to my actual achievements. The Southwest Technology Innovations Summit attracted attendees from across the country, including executives from Fortune 500 companies, prominent venture capitalists, and entrepreneurs whose companies had achieved national and international success. The fact that Marcus automatically categorized it as a minor local event said more about his preconceptions than about the conference's actual stature. I didn't bother correcting his misunderstanding or explaining the significance of being selected as a keynote speaker. The conversation reinforced my growing realization that Marcus had constructed a mental framework where my success could only exist within carefully circumscribed limits. In his worldview, I might achieve modest recognition within the local tech community, but I couldn't possibly reach the level of accomplishment that would earn respect from the business establishment he aspired to join. Amanda's response was even more revealing when Marcus mentioned the conference during a family dinner the following weekend. "How wonderful," she said with practiced enthusiasm, immediately pivoting to share news about her own company's upcoming marketing campaign for a luxury resort opening in Sedona. The implicit message was clear. My speaking engagement was worth a polite acknowledgement, while her professional activities deserved extended discussion and family interest. The pattern had become familiar and predictable. Any achievement related to ConnectLocal was treated as a hobby milestone. Interesting, but not particularly significant. While Marcus and Amanda's conventional career progress received serious attention and celebration. The disparity wasn't malicious, but it reflected deep-seated assumptions about what constituted legitimate professional success and which types of businesses deserved recognition and respect. Watching my parents' excitement as the summit approached provided a sharp contrast to my brother's indifference. Dad researched the conference online, proudly sharing articles about previous speakers and attendees, with neighbors and customers who had followed ConnectLocal's growth from its garage origins. Mom bought a new dress for the occasion, treating the event with the seriousness and ceremony it deserved. Their pride was uncomplicated and genuine, unmarred by the social calculations and status considerations that seemed to influence Marcus and Amanda's reactions to my achievements. For my parents, the fact that their daughter had built a successful company that created opportunities for people like themselves was a source of pure joy and validation of the values they had instilled through their own example of hard work and perseverance. The weekend before the summit, I received an unexpected phone call from Dr. Sarah Chen, a professor of entrepreneurship at ASU's business school, who had been following ConnectLocal's development through industry publications and local business coverage. Dr. Chen had read about my upcoming presentation and wanted to discuss the possibility of using ConnectLocal as a case study in her graduate-level course on community-focused business models. The conversation was revelatory in ways I hadn't anticipated. Dr. Chen explained that business schools across the country were struggling to address the gap between traditional entrepreneurship education, which focused primarily on venture capital-backed startups, seeking rapid scaling and eventual acquisition or public offering, and the reality that most successful small businesses grew through sustainable, community-based strategies that prioritized long-term value creation over short-term profit maximization. ConnectLocal represents exactly the kind of innovation that we need more of, Dr. Chen explained during our hour-long conversation. You've proven that technology companies can achieve significant impact and financial success while remaining rooted in community values and serving markets that are often overlooked by venture capital-backed startups. Your approach challenges conventional wisdom about scaling and growth in ways that could influence how we teach entrepreneurship to the next generation. The academic validation was particularly meaningful because it addressed the persistent criticism I had faced about ConnectLocal's unconventional business model and growth strategy. Marcus and others in his social circle had repeatedly suggested that our community focus and resistance to traditional venture capital funding indicated a lack of ambition or understanding of how real businesses operated. Dr. Chen's perspective offered a completely different framework for evaluating our success and impact. Our conversation also revealed that ConnectLocal had attracted attention from researchers and policymakers who were studying technology's role in workforce development and economic empowerment. Several organizations had referenced our platform in reports about innovative approaches to supporting small businesses and gig economy workers, though I had been largely unaware of this broader recognition until Dr. Chen brought it to my attention. The realization that ConnectLocal was being studied and discussed in academic and policy circles far beyond Arizona represented a level of influence and impact that I had never expected when we started in the garage. We weren't just building a successful local business, we were contributing to larger conversations about technology, community development, and economic justice that had implications far beyond our immediate user base. The morning of the summit, I stood in the bathroom of the Phoenician Resort, the same venue where Marcus and Amanda had held their wedding reception 3 years earlier, adjusting the jacket of a tailored suit that had cost more than I used to spend on clothes in an entire year. The irony of returning to this symbol of Wellington family wealth and social status, but this time as a featured speaker, rather than a marginalized family member, wasn't lost on me. My parents looked distinguished and proud as we entered the resort's main conference hall, which had been transformed into a sophisticated venue with professional lighting, multiple screens displaying the summit agenda, and networking areas where hundreds of attendees mingled over gourmet coffee and pastries. Dad wore his best suit, the same one he had worn to Marcus's wedding, while Mom had chosen an elegant dress that struck the perfect balance between professional and celebratory. The other speakers and attendees represented exactly the kind of business elite that Marcus and Amanda spent their social energy trying to impress. Venture capitalists who managed hundreds of millions in investment funds, CEOs of companies that employed thousands of people, entrepreneurs whose exits had made them wealthy enough to become angel investors and philanthropists. Yet here I was, the community college graduate from South Phoenix, scheduled to share the stage with these titans of industry. The morning sessions featured presentations on artificial intelligence, blockchain applications, and venture capital trends. Topics that reflected the summit's focus on cutting-edge technology and high-growth business models. I listened carefully to each speaker, taking notes and identifying themes that connected to ConnectLocal's mission and strategy, preparing for my own presentation that would offer a dramatically different perspective on innovation and success. During the networking break before lunch, I found myself in conversations with executives who were genuinely curious about ConnectLocal's approach and impressed by our growth metrics and community impact. Several attendees had researched our company in advance and came prepared with thoughtful questions about our customer acquisition strategies, retention techniques, and plans for expansion. The quality and sophistication of these conversations stood in stark contrast to the polite but dismissive interactions I had grown accustomed to at family gatherings. These business leaders understood the challenges of building sustainable companies, appreciated the difficulty of achieving profitability without venture capital, and recognized the strategic value of deep community engagement and customer loyalty. One particularly memorable conversation was with Jennifer Walsh, the CEO of a Phoenix-based logistics company that employed over 2,000 people and generated annual revenue in the hundreds of millions. Jennifer had built her company from a small freight brokerage operation, scaling it over 15 years into one of the Southwest's largest transportation providers, and she immediately understood the strategic thinking behind ConnectLocal's community-focused approach. Too many entrepreneurs get distracted by the venture capital game and lose sight of the fundamentals, Jennifer explained over coffee that probably cost more per cup than many people made per hour. Building a business that serves real customers and solves genuine problems will always be more sustainable than chasing the latest investment trends. What you've accomplished with ConnectLocal is exactly the kind of innovation that creates lasting value. The validation from someone of Jennifer's stature and experience was intoxicating in ways I hadn't expected. For 3 years, I had been building ConnectLocal while constantly defending our strategy and mission to people who questioned whether we were thinking big enough or moving fast enough. To have respected industry leaders recognize our approach as not just viable but innovative and strategically sound felt like vindication of every difficult decision and long night of work. As the lunch hour approached and my presentation time drew near, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that reminded me of the early days of pitching ConnectLocal to our first major clients. The difference was that this audience had the knowledge and experience to truly understand what we had accomplished, rather than dismissing our achievements based on preconceived notions about garage startups and community college entrepreneurs. The presentation itself felt like a culmination of everything I had learned about building a business, leading a team, and staying true to personal values while achieving professional success. I spoke about the importance of understanding your customers not as demographic segments but as real people with complex needs and circumstances. I discussed the competitive advantages that came from authentic community engagement and the sustainable growth that resulted from prioritizing customer success over rapid scaling. The audience response was overwhelmingly positive, with multiple standing ovations and a question and answer session that extended well beyond the scheduled time slot. Attendees wanted to know about our hiring practices, our approach to company culture, our methods for measuring community impact, and our plans for expansion while maintaining our mission focus. Several venture capitalists approached me after the presentation with interest in learning more about ConnectLocal, though they seemed to understand that we weren't seeking traditional investment relationships. Instead, they wanted to discuss how other portfolio companies might adopt elements of our customer engagement strategy and community development approach. The most meaningful response came from other entrepreneurs who were building companies that served working-class communities and underrepresented markets. They had faced similar challenges around credibility and recognition, constantly defending their business models to people who assumed that serving lower-income customers meant accepting lower profits and limited growth potential. One conversation that particularly resonated was with Miguel Hernandez, who had built a financial services company that provided banking and lending services to undocumented immigrants and other populations who were excluded from traditional financial institutions. Miguel's company had achieved remarkable success by understanding the specific needs and challenges of his customer base, but he constantly faced skepticism from investors and industry observers, who questioned whether serving this market could generate substantial returns. The hardest part isn't building the business, Miguel explained as we talked during the post-presentation reception. It's getting people to take you seriously when your customer base doesn't fit their preconceptions about profitable markets. They see serving working-class communities as charity work rather than strategic business development. His observation perfectly captured the frustration I had experienced with Marcus and Amanda's dismissive attitudes toward ConnectLocal. They couldn't imagine that a business focused on serving people like our parents could achieve the kind of success and recognition that would earn respect from the broader business community. Their limited perspective had prevented them from recognizing what we were building until external validation forced them to reconsider their assumptions. As the summit concluded and I prepared to return home with my parents, who had spent the day beaming with pride and collecting business cards from people who wanted to learn more about their daughter's company, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in how I understood my own achievements and trajectory. ConnectLocal wasn't a stepping stone to something bigger or more legitimate. It was exactly what I was meant to build. The recognition from industry leaders, the interest from academics and policymakers, and the impact on thousands of users proved that community-focused businesses could achieve every measure of success that mattered, from financial performance to social impact to professional recognition. The drive home from the summit marked the end of my concern about earning validation from people who were unable or unwilling to understand what we had accomplished. Marcus and Amanda could continue to view ConnectLocal as a hobby business or local success story, but their opinion no longer carried the weight it once had. The broader business community had evaluated our work and found it not just successful, but innovative and worthy of study and emulation. What I didn't anticipate was how dramatically this shift in perspective would be tested in the weeks that followed, when circumstances would force Marcus and his in-laws to confront the reality of ConnectLocal's success and my position within the business community they aspired to join. 3 months after the Southwest Technology Innovation Summit, ConnectLocal achieved a milestone that would have seemed impossible during our garage startup days. Forbes magazine featured us in their annual 30 Under 30 Inches list for social entrepreneurs, recognizing our impact on workforce development and community economic empowerment. The article, written by a senior editor who had spent weeks researching our business model and interviewing our users, positioned ConnectLocal as a pioneering example of how technology companies could achieve both financial success and meaningful social impact. The Forbes recognition triggered a cascade of media attention and business opportunities that transformed ConnectLocal from a successful regional platform into a nationally recognized company. Major publications wanted to interview me about our growth strategy and community-focused approach. Business schools requested case studies for their entrepreneurship programs. Other tech companies sought partnerships and consulting relationships to help them implement similar community engagement strategies. More significantly, the recognition attracted interest from investors who understood that sustainable, profitable businesses serving underrepresented markets represented enormous untapped opportunities. Unlike traditional venture capitalists who might have pushed for rapid scaling and geographic expansion at the expense of our mission focus, these impact investors appreciated our methodical approach to growth and community development. Taylor and I spent weeks evaluating partnership proposals and investment opportunities, ultimately selecting collaborators who shared our values and could help us expand our impact without compromising our commitment to the communities we served. The funding we accepted allowed us to hire additional developers, expand our customer support team, and invest in infrastructure improvements that would support sustainable growth over the next several years. The transformation was remarkable, but also surreal. One morning, I was defending our business model to family members who viewed ConnectLocal as an interesting hobby. And the next, I was fielding calls from reporters who wanted to understand how a community college graduate from South Phoenix had built one of the most innovative platforms in the gig economy space. The media attention brought unexpected personal scrutiny that I hadn't anticipated or prepared for. Journalists wanted to explore my background, my family's immigrant story, and the role that working-class experiences had played in shaping ConnectLocal's mission and strategy. While I was proud of our origins and eager to share credit with my parents for instilling the values that guided our business development, the spotlight felt overwhelming at times. Marcus learned about the Forbes recognition not from me, but from a colleague at his insurance company who had seen the article and mentioned it during a casual conversation. His initial reaction, according to Amanda, was disbelief followed by what she described as, quote, complicated emotions about his sister's sudden national prominence. The complexity of Marcus's response became apparent during a phone call he initiated several days after the article was published. His tone was simultaneously congratulatory and defensive, as if he were trying to reconcile years of dismissive comments with the reality that ConnectLocal had achieved the kind of recognition that he had always insisted was beyond our reach. "I saw the Forbes thing," he began, his voice carefully controlled. "That's really impressive, Jess. I had no idea ConnectLocal had grown to that level. You should have told us how big it was getting." The comment revealed so much about how Marcus had processed our previous conversations about the business. Despite my attempts to share our growth metrics, user feedback, and expansion plans, he had filtered that information through his preconceptions about garage startups and community-focused businesses. The external validation from Forbes hadn't changed ConnectLocal's actual achievements, but it had forced Marcus to reconsider his assumptions about what we had been building. I kept my response neutral and factual, sharing some recent statistics about our user growth and revenue development, but I could sense his discomfort with the conversation. For 3 years, Marcus had positioned himself as the successful sibling with the conventional career and upward social mobility, while treating me as the well-meaning but ultimately limited sister who played with computers. The Forbes recognition had disrupted that narrative in ways that were clearly difficult for him to process. The conversation concluded with Marcus suggesting that we should get together soon to, quote, celebrate properly, and discuss how ConnectLocal's success might create opportunities for family collaboration. The offer felt both genuine and calculated, as if he were trying to re-establish connection, while positioning himself to benefit from associations with my newfound prominence. Amanda's response was more immediately transparent than Marcus's complicated emotions. She called me directly the following week, her voice bright with the kind of enthusiasm she typically reserved for discussing her own professional achievements or social events. "Jessica, I can't believe you didn't tell us how successful ConnectLocal had become," she said, as if my previous attempts to share our progress had somehow been inadequate or unclear. "Robert and Patricia are absolutely fascinated by your story. Patricia has been telling all her friends about her daughter-in-law's brilliant sister who built this amazing company from nothing." The characterization was revealing on multiple levels. Amanda had transformed from polite disinterest to enthusiastic advocacy seemingly overnight, while Patricia Wellington, who had spent years treating me as an unfortunate reminder of her son-in-law's working-class origins, was now claiming connection to my success through family relationships. Amanda's call included an invitation that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. The Wellington family was hosting their annual charity gala to benefit educational programs for underprivileged youth, and Patricia wanted to invite me as a featured guest who could speak about entrepreneurship and community development to the assembled donors and community leaders. "She thinks your story would be perfect for the gala's theme this year," Amanda explained. "You know, overcoming challenges through education and innovation. Plus, having someone with your profile as a speaker would really elevate the event's status." The irony was almost overwhelming. Patricia Wellington, who had spent years viewing me as evidence of her son-in-law's poor judgment and social limitations, was now eager to associate her family's charitable work with my achievements. The woman who had made subtle but cutting comments about my lack of formal education wanted me to inspire wealthy donors by discussing how I had succeeded, despite educational and economic barriers. I accepted the invitation partly from curiosity about how the Wellington family would navigate this dramatic reversal of assumptions, but mostly because the cause was genuinely important to me. Educational opportunities for working-class youth had always been central to ConnectLocal's mission, and speaking at a fundraising event that could provide resources for students like my younger self felt like a meaningful way to use my platform. The weeks leading up to the gala provided fascinating insights into how quickly social dynamics could shift when external validation forced people to reconsider their preconceptions. Amanda began calling regularly with questions about ConnectLocal's growth story, ostensibly to help Patricia plan the event, but clearly also to educate herself about achievements she had previously ignored or minimized. Marcus's behavior became increasingly awkward as he struggled to reconcile his public support for his successful sister with his private discomfort about being overshadowed by someone he had consistently underestimated. Family conversations became exercises in careful navigation, with Marcus offering enthusiastic praise for accomplishments he had previously dismissed, while avoiding direct acknowledgement of his earlier skepticism. The most revealing change was in how Marcus and Amanda discussed ConnectLocal with their social circle. According to mutual acquaintances, they had begun prominently mentioning my Forbes recognition and business success in contexts where they previously would have deflected questions about my work or changed the subject to more conventional career achievements. Patricia Wellington's transformation was the most dramatic of all. The woman who had once suggested that people from my background were better suited for support-type positions was now researching ConnectLocal's business model and community impact with the thoroughness of someone preparing for a doctoral defense. She had apparently spent hours reading articles about our platform, studying our user testimonials, and learning about the broader movement toward community-focused business development. When Patricia called me personally to discuss the gala presentation, her tone was so dramatically different from previous interactions that I initially thought I was speaking with someone else. The condescension and careful distance had been replaced by what seemed like genuine respect and interest in my perspective on entrepreneurship and social impact. "I've been reading about ConnectLocal's approach to workforce development," she said, her voice carrying none of the subtle dismissiveness that had characterized our previous conversations. "Your strategy of building trust within communities, rather than trying to scale rapidly, is absolutely brilliant. I can see why the business community is so impressed with what you've accomplished." The conversation continued for over an hour, with Patricia asking thoughtful questions about our growth strategies, community partnerships, and plans for expansion. Her engagement felt authentic rather than performative, as if she were genuinely trying to understand how she had so completely misjudged my potential and achievements. The evening of the Wellington Family Charity Gala arrived with all the elegance and sophistication that characterized their social events. The Phoenician Resort Ballroom had been transformed into a sophisticated venue with professional lighting, floral arrangements that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries, and a guest list that represented the pinnacle of Phoenix's business and social establishment. I arrived wearing a designer dress that Taylor had insisted I purchase for the occasion, accompanied by my parents, who looked distinguished and proud as we entered the ballroom where Marcus and Amanda had celebrated their wedding reception years earlier. The circular nature of returning to this venue, but this time as the evening's featured speaker rather than a marginalized family member, felt like a completion of some cosmic cycle. The guest list included exactly the kind of people that Marcus and Amanda had spent years trying to impress through careful social climbing and strategic networking. Major real estate developers, prominent attorneys, successful entrepreneurs, and philanthropists whose names appeared regularly in local society publications, mingled over cocktails and hors d'oeuvre that represented more culinary sophistication than most people experienced in a lifetime. Marcus and Amanda positioned themselves near the entrance to greet arrivals, with Marcus introducing me to their acquaintances in terms that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. "This is my sister Jessica, the founder of ConnectLocal," he would say, his voice carrying pride that felt both genuine and carefully performed. "You might have seen the Forbes article about her company. She's tonight's keynote speaker." The introductions were surreal, because they represented such a complete reversal of how Marcus had discussed my work in previous social settings. People who had heard years of dismissive comments about my computer hobby were now being told about my national recognition and business achievements, with the enthusiasm of someone who had always been my biggest supporter. Amanda's behavior was equally transformed, as she proudly shared details about ConnectLocal's community impact and growth metrics with the fluency of someone who had been following our progress closely for years. The woman who had once suggested that I should focus on higher-end service providers to improve our profit margins was now explaining our mission-driven approach to wealthy donors, as if she had always understood and supported our strategy. The most remarkable transformation was Patricia Wellington herself, who approached me during the cocktail reception with what appeared to be genuine nervousness about our interaction. The woman who had spent years treating me with polite condescension now seemed concerned about making a positive impression, as if my opinion of her mattered in ways she was still learning to navigate. "Jessica, I'm so grateful you agreed to speak tonight," she said, her voice carrying none of the social authority that had characterized our previous encounters. "I've learned so much about ConnectLocal over the past few weeks. What you've built is truly remarkable, and I hope tonight's audience will appreciate the significance of your achievements." The conversation continued with Patricia sharing her research about community-focused business development and asking for my perspectives on how charitable organizations could better support entrepreneurship in underserved communities. Her questions were thoughtful and informed, suggesting that she had invested significant time and effort in understanding not just ConnectLocal's specific approach, but the broader movement toward social entrepreneurship that we represented. As the dinner portion of the evening began, I found myself seated at the head table alongside Patricia and Robert Wellington, Phoenix's mayor, and several prominent business leaders whose companies I had long admired from a distance. The placement was clearly intentional, designed to signal my status as the evening's honored guest, and to facilitate conversations about entrepreneurship and community development with the assembled donors. The dinner conversation was revelatory in ways I hadn't anticipated. These community leaders, who represented exactly the kind of establishment success that Marcus and Amanda aspired to join, were genuinely interested in ConnectLocal's approach and eager to discuss how similar strategies might be applied to other social and economic challenges facing the region. Robert Wellington, the retired Arizona Supreme Court justice whose legal career had earned him respect across the political spectrum, was particularly engaged in discussing the intersection between entrepreneurship and social justice. "What you've accomplished with ConnectLocal addresses fundamental questions about economic opportunity and community development," he said during the main course. "Your approach proves that business success and social impact aren't competing priorities, but rather complementary strategies for creating sustainable change." The validation from someone of Robert's stature and experience felt particularly meaningful because it addressed the persistent criticism that community-focused businesses somehow represented compromised ambition or limited thinking. His recognition that ConnectLocal represented sophisticated strategic thinking rather than charitable sentiment helped validate the approach we had developed through years of methodical growth and community engagement. As the evening progressed toward my presentation, I observed Marcus and Amanda navigating conversations with their social peers who were eager to learn more about the successful entrepreneur in their family. The dynamic was fascinating because it revealed how completely external validation had transformed their understanding of my achievements and potential. People who had previously heard dismissive references to my computer projects were now approaching Marcus with genuine curiosity about ConnectLocal's business model and growth strategy. Amanda found herself fielding questions about our community partnerships and social impact metrics, topics she was learning to discuss with the same enthusiasm she typically reserved for luxury hospitality marketing. The moment that crystallized the evening's significance came when Patricia Wellington stepped to the podium to introduce my presentation. Her remarks represented such a complete reversal of her previous attitudes toward me and my work that I wondered if other family members were experiencing the same sense of cognitive dissonance that I felt listening to her words. Tonight's speaker represents exactly the kind of innovation and leadership that our community needs to address the challenges of economic inequality and workforce development, Patricia began, her voice carrying the authority and conviction that had made her a respected figure in Phoenix philanthropic circles. Jessica Rodriguez has built ConnectLocal not just as a successful business but as a platform for creating opportunity and empowerment in communities that are often overlooked by traditional economic development strategies. She continued with detailed descriptions of our user impact, growth metrics, and recognition from national business publications, speaking about ConnectLocal with the kind of deep knowledge and genuine enthusiasm that suggested extensive research and consideration. The woman who had once questioned whether achieve lasting success was now presenting me to Phoenix's elite as an exemplar of entrepreneurial excellence and social innovation. Jessica's story reminds us that innovation and leadership can emerge from any community, and that the most transformative businesses are often built by entrepreneurs who understand the challenges faced by the customers they serve, Patricia concluded. Please join me in welcoming Jessica Rodriguez, founder and CEO of ConnectLocal. The standing ovation that followed Patricia's introduction felt like vindication not just for my own achievements, but for every working-class entrepreneur who had been told that their background disqualified them from serious consideration in elite business circles. As I approached the podium, I could see Marcus and Amanda beaming with pride that appeared completely genuine, despite the years they had spent minimizing my potential and dismissing my ambitions. My presentation focused on the strategic advantages that came from authentic community engagement and the sustainable growth that resulted from prioritizing customer success over rapid scaling. I discussed ConnectLocal's development as an example of how technology companies could achieve both financial success and meaningful social impact by understanding and serving markets that were often overlooked by venture capital-backed startups. The audience response was overwhelmingly positive, with multiple standing ovations and a question-and-answer session that extended well beyond the scheduled time slot. Attendees wanted to know about our hiring practices, our approach to company culture, our methods for measuring community impact, and our plans for expansion while maintaining our mission focus. The most gratifying questions came from other entrepreneurs and business leaders who recognized ConnectLocal's strategic sophistication and wanted to understand how they might apply similar principles to their own companies and industries. These weren't polite inquiries from people trying to be supportive. They were serious business discussions with established leaders who saw value in our approach and wanted to learn from our experience. After the presentation, the reception provided opportunities for extended conversations with community leaders who had been following ConnectLocal's development and were eager to discuss potential collaborations and partnerships. Several major employers expressed interest in using our platform to connect with service providers, while nonprofit organizations wanted to explore how ConnectLocal's model might be adapted to address other workforce development challenges. The evening concluded with Patricia Wellington personally thanking me for my contribution to the event's success and expressing genuine regret about her previous failure to recognize ConnectLocal's potential and significance. "I owe you an apology, Jessica," she said during a private moment as the evening wound down. "I allowed my preconceptions to blind me to what you were building and achieving. What you've accomplished is remarkable, and I'm honored to have you as part of our extended family." The apology felt both meaningful and incomplete, acknowledging years of dismissive treatment while stopping short of examining the broader assumptions and biases that had shaped her previous attitudes. but it represented genuine recognition of error and a commitment to changed behavior, which felt like more than I had expected when I accepted the speaking invitation. Marcus's behavior throughout the evening had been a study in complex emotions, pride and discomfort competing for dominance, as he watched his sister receive the kind of recognition and respect that he had always craved for himself. During our brief conversation as the evening concluded, he seemed to be struggling with how to acknowledge years of skepticism, while positioning himself as a supportive family member. "I'm sorry I didn't understand what you were building," he said quietly as we waited for the valet to retrieve our cars. "I thought I was being realistic about business and career development, but I was just being limited in my thinking. You proved that there are different ways to achieve success, and your way has turned out to be pretty spectacular." The admission felt like both an apology and an attempt at reconciliation, though it avoided directly addressing the condescension and dismissiveness that had characterized his attitude toward ConnectLocal for years. Still, it represented acknowledgement that his assumptions had been wrong, and that my unconventional approach had achieved results that his conventional wisdom hadn't anticipated. As I drove home with my parents, who had spent the evening glowing with pride and collecting business cards from people who wanted to learn more about their daughter's company, I reflected on how dramatically circumstances had changed in just a few months. The external validation from Forbes and the business community hadn't transformed ConnectLocal's actual achievements, but it had forced Marcus, Amanda, and Patricia to confront the reality of what we had built while they were dismissing our potential. The recognition felt gratifying, but more importantly, it provided a platform for sharing ConnectLocal's mission and approach with community leaders who had the resources and influence to support similar initiatives. The evening had generated concrete opportunities for partnerships, collaborations, and expansion that could amplify our impact while maintaining our commitment to community-focused development. The drive home also provided time to process the complex emotions surrounding Marcus and Amanda's dramatic change in attitude toward my work and achievements. Their newfound enthusiasm felt both welcome and hollow, appreciation that had required external validation rather than emerging from genuine understanding or family loyalty. I realized that the recognition and respect I had always sought from Marcus and his social circle mattered less now that I had built something meaningful and sustainable based on my own values and vision. ConnectLocal's success hadn't been achieved to prove anything to people who doubted my potential. It had grown from a genuine desire to create opportunities and solve problems in communities that I understood and cared about. The evening at the Wellington Family Gala marked the end of my need for validation from people who had been unable to recognize value and potential, until it was confirmed by external authorities. Marcus, Amanda, and Patricia could continue to navigate their social and professional worlds with whatever understanding they could develop about entrepreneurship and community development, but their opinions would no longer influence my decisions or self-perception. What mattered now was continuing to build ConnectLocal in ways that honored our mission and served our community, while using our growing platform and influence to support other entrepreneurs who were creating innovative solutions to persistent social and economic challenges. The recognition had been gratifying, but the real satisfaction came from knowing that we were building something that created genuine value and opportunity for people whose potential was often overlooked or underestimated by traditional institutions and established businesses. Walking into my house that night, still wearing the designer dress that symbolized how far I had traveled from the garage where ConnectLocal began, I felt a sense of completion and anticipation. We had proven that community-focused businesses could achieve every measure of success that mattered, from financial performance to social impact to professional recognition. Now the real work could begin, using that success to create even more opportunities for the communities and individuals who had supported our growth from the very beginning. Marcus rolled his eyes when I walked into that gala, thinking I was crashing his social circle or trying to fit into a world where I didn't belong. But when Patricia Wellington introduced me as the evening's keynote speaker, when the room full of Phoenix's elite gave me standing ovations, when business leaders lined up to discuss partnerships and collaborations, the truth became undeniable. I hadn't been trying to fit into their world at all. I had been building my own, and it turned out to be bigger, more impactful, and more successful than anything they had imagined possible for the girl from South Phoenix who learned to code in her parents' garage. 6 months after the Wellington Family Charity Gala, I found myself standing in the boardroom of ConnectLocal's new headquarters, a gleaming office space in downtown Phoenix that bore no resemblance to the humble garage where our journey had begun. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the Sonoran Desert Mountains, while the conference table was surrounded by faces that represented the evolution of our company, from scrappy startup to nationally recognized platform for community empowerment. Taylor sat to my right as Chief Technology Officer, her laptop open to display user growth metrics that would have seemed fantastical during our early days of debugging code at 2 in the morning. Across from her, Miguel Santos, our newly hired Chief Operating Officer, reviewed partnership agreements with major corporations who wanted to integrate ConnectLocal's community-focused approach into their own workforce development initiatives. The transformation was remarkable, but what struck me most was how we had scaled our impact without compromising the values and mission that had guided us from the beginning. The morning's agenda included discussions about expansion into 3 new metropolitan markets, each selected not for their potential revenue generation, but for their underserved communities that could benefit from ConnectLocal's approach to connecting skilled workers with meaningful opportunities. We had learned that sustainable growth came from understanding local needs and building authentic relationships, rather than imposing standardized solutions from distant headquarters. Our success metrics told a story that validated every difficult decision we had made during the lean years. Over 15,000 service providers now used ConnectLocal to build and sustain their businesses, generating combined annual income that exceeded $50 million. More importantly, we had created a platform that preserved the dignity and autonomy of independent workers while providing the security and growth opportunities that traditional employment often failed to deliver. The financial performance was equally impressive, with quarterly revenue that exceeded the annual budgets of many established companies. But the numbers that mattered most were the ones that traditional business metrics couldn't capture. The single mothers who had achieved economic stability through ConnectLocal bookings, the immigrants who had built thriving businesses despite language barriers and cultural obstacles, the formerly incarcerated individuals who had found second chances through our platform's focus on skills and reliability rather than background checks and credit scores. During our break between morning sessions, I received a text message from Marcus that perfectly captured how dramatically our family dynamics had shifted over the past year. "Saw the Wall Street Journal article about ConnectLocal's expansion," he wrote. "Really proud of everything you've built. Would love to take you to lunch this week to celebrate and catch up properly." The tone was warm and genuine, lacking the condescension and skepticism that had characterized his previous communications about my work. But more significantly, it represented his growing understanding that ConnectLocal's success wasn't a lucky accident or temporary trend, but rather the result of strategic thinking and persistent execution that had created lasting value and impact. Marcus had undergone his own professional evolution during the months following the charity gala. Inspired by ConnectLocal's community-focused approach, he had begun advocating within his insurance company for programs that would better serve working-class customers who had traditionally been overlooked or underserved by the industry. His efforts had led to the development of new product offerings specifically designed for small business owners and independent contractors, work that had earned him recognition and advancement within his company. The change in Marcus represented more than personal growth. It reflected a broader shift in how established businesses were beginning to understand the strategic value of serving diverse communities with authentic respect and cultural competence. ConnectLocal's success had demonstrated that companies could achieve both financial performance and social impact by prioritizing customer success over short-term profit maximization. Amanda had experienced her own transformation, leaving her position at the luxury resort chain to join a nonprofit organization focused on supporting women entrepreneurs in underserved communities. Her marketing expertise, combined with newfound appreciation for mission-driven work, had proven invaluable in helping other women navigate the challenges of building businesses while managing family responsibilities and societal expectations. Her career change reflected genuine personal growth rather than opportunistic association with ConnectLocal's success. Amanda had recognized that her skills and experience could create more meaningful impact when applied to supporting entrepreneurs who faced barriers similar to those I had encountered during our garage startup days. Her work now involved providing mentorship, marketing guidance, and strategic planning support to women who were building businesses that served their own communities with passion and purpose. The most remarkable transformation, however, was Patricia Wellington's evolution from skeptical critic to genuine advocate for community-focused entrepreneurship. She had used her influence within Phoenix's philanthropic community to establish a fund specifically designed to support technology entrepreneurs from underrepresented backgrounds, providing not just financial resources but also mentorship and networking opportunities that could help bridge the gap between innovative ideas and sustainable businesses. Patricia's advocacy went beyond personal redemption for her previous dismissive attitudes. It represented sophisticated understanding of how systemic barriers prevented talented entrepreneurs from accessing the resources and support systems that more privileged founders took for granted. Her fund had already supported dozens of promising startups, with several achieving significant growth and community impact within their first year of operation. The ripple effects of ConnectLocal's success had extended far beyond our immediate family and social circles. Universities across the country were developing case studies based on our business model, using our experience to teach students about alternative approaches to entrepreneurship that prioritize sustainability and community impact over rapid scaling and venture capital fundraising. Dr. Sarah Chen had become a regular collaborator, working with ConnectLocal to develop research initiatives that could provide academic validation for community-focused business strategies, while identifying best practices that other entrepreneurs could adapt to their own contexts. Her work was contributing to broader conversations about social entrepreneurship and inclusive economic development that were influencing policy discussions at state and federal levels. The academic attention felt gratifying, but the real validation came from other entrepreneurs who were building similar platforms in their own communities, adapting ConnectLocal's principles to address different challenges and serve different populations. A network of community-focused businesses was emerging across the country, each maintaining local identity and cultural specificity, while sharing strategies and supporting each other's growth. One particularly meaningful development was the relationship we had built with international organizations interested in adapting ConnectLocal's approach to support economic development in emerging markets. Representatives from several African and Latin American countries had visited our offices to study our platform design and community engagement strategies, exploring how similar principles might be applied to connect skilled workers with opportunities in contexts where traditional employment was limited or unreliable. The international interest reflected growing recognition that technology solutions for economic empowerment needed to be designed by people who understood the challenges faced by working-class communities, rather than imposed by distant institutions with limited cultural competence or authentic community connection. ConnectLocal's success had demonstrated that sustainable platforms require deep understanding of user needs, trust building within communities, and long-term commitment to customer success. As the afternoon session of our board meeting commenced, I reflected on how the recognition and expansion opportunities had created new responsibilities and challenges that required constant attention to our founding principles and mission focus. Growth brought temptations to compromise community relationships for efficiency, to prioritize profitable markets over underserved populations, and to adopt conventional business practices that might undermine the authenticity that had made ConnectLocal successful. Maintaining our values while scaling our impact required vigilant decision-making and regular evaluation of whether our policies and practices still reflected our commitment to community empowerment. We had established internal systems for measuring not just financial performance but also user satisfaction, community impact, and employee engagement, ensuring that growth didn't come at the expense of the relationships and principles that had guided our development. The challenge was particularly acute when evaluating partnership opportunities with larger corporations that wanted to integrate ConnectLocal services into their own workforce development initiatives. While such partnerships could expand our reach and impact, they also risked diluting our community focus, if not carefully structured, to preserve our autonomy and mission alignment. We had learned to evaluate potential partners based on their genuine commitment to community development rather than just their financial resources or market reach. The most successful collaborations had been with companies that shared our values and were willing to adapt their own practices to align with ConnectLocal's community-focused approach, rather than expecting us to modify our principles to fit their existing business models. One particularly successful partnership was with a national retail chain that had committed to hiring ConnectLocal service providers for store maintenance, seasonal decorating, and customer service support across their Southwest locations. The arrangement provided steady income opportunities for hundreds of our users while helping the retailer build stronger connections with the communities where their stores operated. The partnership worked because the retailer's leadership understood that authentic community engagement required treating service providers as valued partners rather than interchangeable vendors. They had adapted their procurement processes to accommodate ConnectLocal's emphasis on relationship building and quality service, resulting in higher customer satisfaction and stronger community relationships than their previous vendor management approach had achieved. Similar partnerships were developing with healthcare organizations, educational institutions, and government agencies that recognized the strategic value of working with service providers who were deeply embedded in the communities they served. These collaborations were creating sustainable income opportunities for ConnectLocal users while helping partner organizations achieve their own community engagement and social impact goals. The evening after our board meeting, I attended a reception for small business owners hosted by the Phoenix Chamber of Commerce, where I had been invited to speak about sustainable entrepreneurship and community development. The event provided opportunities to connect with other local business leaders who were exploring how they might adapt ConnectLocal's principles to their own industries and customer bases. The conversation that evening reflected growing recognition within the business community that sustainable success required authentic engagement with diverse communities and genuine commitment to customer and employee well-being. The traditional focus on maximizing short-term profits at the expense of long-term relationships was giving way to more sophisticated understanding of how businesses could create value for all stakeholders while achieving financial sustainability. One particularly insightful discussion was with Elena Rodriguez, no relation despite our shared surname, who had built a successful construction company that specialized in affordable housing development in working-class neighborhoods. Elena had faced many of the same challenges I had encountered, including skepticism from established contractors who questioned whether serving lower-income markets could generate adequate profits and sustainable growth. The biggest barrier wasn't technical or financial, Elena explained during our conversation over locally sourced appetizers and craft cocktails. It was convincing people that affordable housing could be both high quality and profitable if you understood your customers' actual needs and built long-term relationships based on trust and reliability. Once we proved that model, other developers started paying attention and asking how they could adapt our approach. Elena's experience reinforced my understanding that community-focused businesses often faced skepticism not because their strategies were flawed, but because they challenged conventional assumptions about which markets were worth serving and how success should be measured. Proving that alternative approaches could work required patience, persistence, and willingness to accept initial criticism from people who couldn't envision different ways of building sustainable enterprises. The reception also provided opportunities to connect with younger entrepreneurs who were building businesses inspired by ConnectLocal's example. Several recent college graduates had approached me throughout the evening to discuss their own ideas for community-focused platforms, seeking advice about balancing social impact with financial sustainability while maintaining authentic relationships with the communities they hoped to serve. Their enthusiasm and sophistication impressed me, suggesting that the next generation of entrepreneurs might be more naturally oriented towards sustainable, inclusive business models than previous cohorts who had been taught to prioritize rapid scaling and venture capital fundraising above all other considerations. The shift represented potential for broader transformation in how businesses understood their roles and responsibilities within the communities where they operated. As I drove home from the reception, passing through the South Phoenix neighborhood where I had grown up and where my parents still lived in the same modest house that had nurtured my early entrepreneurial dreams, I reflected on how dramatically my understanding of success and achievement had evolved over the past several years. The external recognition from Forbes, the speaking invitations, and the business partnerships were gratifying, but they felt less important now than the personal satisfaction of knowing that ConnectLocal was creating genuine opportunities for people whose potential was often overlooked or undervalued by traditional institutions. The platform we had built was generating measurable economic impact while preserving the dignity and autonomy of independent workers who chose entrepreneurship over conventional employment. More personally, the journey had taught me about the importance of staying true to personal values and community connections, even when pursuing ambitious goals that required engaging with unfamiliar social and professional environments. The recognition from Marcus, Amanda, and Patricia had felt meaningful when it finally came, but it hadn't been necessary for my own sense of accomplishment or self-worth. The real validation had come from users like Maria Santos, whose catering business had flourished through ConnectLocal bookings, allowing her to hire additional employees and expand into commercial kitchen space. It had come from service providers who sent messages thanking us for creating a platform that treated them as skilled professionals rather than disposable labor. It had come from community organizations that recognized ConnectLocal as a tool for economic empowerment that aligned with their own missions and values. Pulling into my driveway at the house I had purchased in a diverse, middle-class neighborhood that reflected my commitment to remaining connected to the community that had shaped my values and perspective, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with external recognition or financial achievements. ConnectLocal had succeeded not because it had impressed people who had initially doubted its potential, but because it had remained faithful to its founding mission of creating opportunities and building trust within communities that deserved respect and support. The future held exciting possibilities for expansion and greater impact, but the foundation was solid and sustainable. We had built something that created genuine value for real people, and that success would continue regardless of how others chose to interpret or evaluate our achievements. The garage startup had become a nationally recognized platform, but the values and relationships that had guided its development remained unchanged and non-negotiable. 6 months after Patricia Wellington had frozen in recognition that the from the wrong side of town was actually the successful entrepreneur she had been praising to her wealthy friends, I realized that her shock and Marcus's eye-rolling had been symptoms of their limited vision rather than reflections of my actual potential. They had needed external validation to see what was always there, while I had learned to trust my own judgment and build success according to my own definitions and standards. The story that had begun with a community college student learning to code in her parents' garage had evolved into something bigger than I had ever imagined, but it had never strayed from its core purpose of creating opportunities and building community. That consistency had been the key to sustainable success, and it would continue to guide ConnectLocal's growth and development, regardless of how much recognition or criticism we received from people who measured achievement by different standards. Walking into my house that evening, surrounded by reminders of the journey that had brought me from South Phoenix garage to national business recognition, I felt profoundly grateful for the skepticism and dismissiveness that had forced me to develop internal motivation and authentic commitment to community service. Marcus's eye-rolling and Patricia's condescension had inadvertently strengthened my resolve and clarified my values in ways that unconditional support might not have achieved. The recognition was nice when it finally came, but the real satisfaction lay in knowing that ConnectLocal would continue creating opportunities and building community long after the awards and articles were forgotten. We had built something sustainable and meaningful, and that achievement belonged entirely to the community of users, employees, and supporters who had believed in our mission when it mattered most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.